Hello, everybody. Good day, good morning, good afternoon, good. We're here for the second in a series of leadership lessons from across the pond with me, Nancy Halpern, and my co-host, Julian Roberts. And today we're going to be talking about a topic that just got a lot of press on LinkedIn, actually, which is the topic of burnout. There's typical burnout, and I think there's lockdown COVID burnout. So Julian, I wanted to ask you, have you ever had an episode of burnout? How have you ever dealt with it?
I suppose I've been fortunate. I don't think I have had burnouts as what I would understand it to be. And I think I've had stress, and certainly in the last 12 months, there's been moments of stress. But I think it's important to distinguish between stress and burnout because they're sort of very different. Stress is more about that sort of felt sense of pressure, demand, but you can still sort of keep going. And I think that chronic stress then rolls into sort of burnout where and I'm not experienced this, where you feel empty and exhausted. And I think it's important to know that and recognize it because there is a difference. And I think just coming into that and as we talk about burnout, and I think it's an important topic right now as leaders, and it sort of plays into the sort of empathetic, sort of human-centric side of leadership, and as we should be. And I think we need to recognize not only the signs in ourselves, which obviously sometimes we often miss, but also recognize it within our teams. And I've just been sort of dwelling on this over the last week or so as well. I'm just thinking, how would I recognize it? And I guess it's when you see either yourself or your team members where they're acting a little bit not so typical. They're a little bit, slightly a bit odd, possibly not themselves, and in some ways that possibly, I don't know, it might be slightly higher sensitivity, it might be highly irritable, they might be even just sort of the reduced performance. They might be in a high performer, suddenly they're not a high performer, and these are sort of things start to question what's happening here, what's going on here, and when you interact with them, they may have troubles with decision making. They may say to you, I'm struggling to eat, sleep, all those things. And they're telltale signs that somebody is either burnt out or certainly in the process. And again, what are your thoughts? And have you been burnt out, certainly the last 12 months or so?
Well, two things to add to that list of visible symptoms. One is, I think, a delayed response, where if somebody is typically pretty much on top of it, all of a sudden they just seem to be not. And the other is, which you can really sense even on the video camera, less animation, a kind of flatness. But in terms of my personal experience, I had never been burnt out until the very end of 2020. And for me, it was just that I don't want to. I just don't want to. And you could fill in the blank of that sentence. I don't want to blank. It didn't matter.
Really?
And it was very unusual for me because I love the churn and mixed upness of life and find that very invigorating. And I did develop some strategies, which I'd like to share, if that's okay.
Oh, yes. Yeah, absolutely.
The first is the sort of preventative burnout strategy, right? Because stress...
This is before you get there.
Correct. Well, this is what I realized afterwards. Like after you do something, you realize, oh, if only I had known. So I think it's generous to share if only I had known.
Absolutely, yeah.
Thank you. So the first is stress can be a precursor to burnout. But when you begin to feel I think two things. One is something somatic, meaning in the body. Is that kind of stress in the back of your neck or that knot in your throat is it not going away? Does it seem to be carrying with you? I actually wrote about this, about deflated balloon syndrome is what I called it. Do you have a case of DBS? Do you actually feel that just continuing over time? I think another trigger is, of course, the behavioral trigger. Do you find yourself in all that clenching and constriction in your body? Are you also getting a little snappier, a little more impatient, a little irritable? And unlike stress, which can just trigger a kind of bark, right? This is kind of a little lower level and a little more consistent. So you find that you're just thinner. Do you see those kind of things in your work when you have worked with people who have burnout, especially right now?
Yeah, I think I suppose it's that it's not so much the barking. As you say, I think stress causes that sense of reactivity, doesn't it? And you can see that people getting stressed and the tearing their hair out. Not that I've got any hair to tear out right now.
Well,
but
you must have gone through periods of enormous stress.
Yes. Well, having 4 daughters is possibly that.
Yeah. Well.
So I've developed strategies over time, slowly as they've been born. So there you go. But I think it's that almost, as you said, that flatness, that deflatedness, that almost sense of people giving up. And I've noticed where there's almost a real shrugness, there's almost like an emptiness, and you can see it in somebody. And I think that's when somebody is absolutely burnt out. And I guess it's as leaders, we've got to observe our people, and as you say, being observant of the somaticness, the physiology, what's going on in somebody, not just about what you're hearing, what you're seeing in terms of their performance, but how are they talking? How are they on Zoom calls now? Are they excitable? Are they engaging? And trying to feel a bit more the whole person here.
Are they not volunteering things? I think the thing is, if you know your people well enough to know what their norm is, and then you give them a little bit of a COVID discount, right? Then you can compare the current state to all of that. So if you had someone who was always an idea generator, and now they're kind of like, looking to the side, head down a little bit, and that happens more than once. But I realized, Julian, I cheated you because I didn't tell you how I got out of it.
I was just about to ask you, actually, yes.
Well, a lot of carbs, I'll say that. But other than that, I think I would recommend for people, at least this is what worked for me, you have to have a judgment-free zone about what's going to nourish you. Because there's a rest that isn't about being sleepy. And so for me, frankly, I really unwind by playing this stupid game on my iPad. It is just a sort of a breath when I don't have to do anything. I found that
is that almost like mindfulness in some ways, where you're becoming a bit more. I know it's a game, but it's getting present, isn't it? It's getting in the now a little bit. Was that more that? Or
I hate to say this, and I'm not being flippant about it, because I asked a meditation teacher about this. Actually, it's almost mindlessness. So I think I think that it's okay to balance short periods of mindlessness with mindfulness. And so you end up having a different notion of nourishment. So maybe it's not the driven for accomplishment that you don't have the energy for, maybe it's actually doing something enormously small, or saying, something, if I'm going to lay on the couch today all day and read a book, I'm not going to judge myself about that.
So giving you permission to do those sort of things, isn't it? And that's a really helpful thing, to almost like self-care, isn't it? I'm going to sit down, I'm going to watch Netflix, and that's it. That's okay.
Yeah. I think the trick with self-permission is a big fat pause on the judgment button.
Yeah.
Right? Because often I see my clients, they'll say, well, I'm very self-aware, but that's really just the beginning of it. So giving yourself permission to nourish yourself also means don't judge yourself. If now, your sourdough starter died, or if something else you started during COVID, now just you don't want to do it anymore. To know that it's a fallow period, and also to know that it won't last. So, but mine lasted quite a long time. I would say it wasn't until early January, frankly. I'd say it was a good 6 weeks.
Oh, really? Okay. So what else did you do besides the playing your game that was a bit mindlessness?
Yes.
And I can't imagine you doing that, Nancy. I really can't. But it's great.
Don't share it with 1,000 people who will now see this posting. But yes. I can tell you something else I did, actually. I realized that one of the contributing factors to my burnout was that I didn't have the intellectual stimulation that I used to have from going to see people in different places.
Okay, yeah.
And so I think the monotony of the same place had contributed to a burnt out of all my senses. So I tried to leverage other things. For example, sense of smell, which is not something I really use that much. I bought 8 different perfume samples, so I could just have like different scents in my life.
Really?
I know. I did. I mean, it's a small thing, but it woke up a different part of my day. Something else I did was I signed up for very, very short bursts of lectures, 90-minute lectures on things that I was just interested in, but I would normally have dipped into. So I think that when you're in burnout, you have to first rest. There are stages, right? I think you seriously have to rest.
Mm.
And then I think once you're a little more rested, you can go towards nurturing and then stimulation.
Mm.
And so I think it's a stage process. I haven't seen a lot written about it that way, but you're so right and wise to say, as a leader, you do have a responsibility for yourself, but you also don't want to be an unrealistic model. If you're the leader who's always like, rah, and you have people who are really kind of burning out, they're not going to respond well to that, I don't think.
No, not at all. And I guess it's how do we almost try and prevent it? I mean, obviously the key thing is prevention obviously is better than cure, as we know, in any context we're currently in right now as well.
Yeah.
And I think, what are your thoughts on that? How do we, as leaders, as organizations, prevent people getting to that place where they go from stress, burnout, and then kaput?
Well, I think it's the human connection you mentioned earlier. You have to be a really good observer of your people, and this whole evolving model of human leadership versus just metrics-driven leadership. Yeah. I think having, spend some time on every group team meeting to say, I just want to talk about how everybody's doing, what's going on. And I think also if you do see that kind of stress pattern, have a one-on-one with your team member that goes along the same lines. Tell me how you're doing. Do you need a half day to just chill out or veg? What else do you need? I think you have to be a really sharp observer of your people. Do you have any other suggestions, Julian?
No, and I agree. And I think the question I've always asked my team, which instead of just saying to you, and I know we jumped on this call before and just said, how are you, Nancy? And we all glibly answer, I'm okay, yeah. But I often say to people, how are you today? And it just puts a stake into the ground today, and it makes people stop, because it's a slightly different, same question, but it's rephrased. So I often I'll say, how are you today? And it makes people think, and they go, well, actually, I'm not great. And then you start the conversation. And I think that's really important to start that conversation. Weirdly, and this sounds really, it's not flippant at all, it's getting people back to their purpose of who they're about. Because often burnout is because they're trying to please people, do loads of things. And often those things are not really part of who they are. So therefore, they don't have the energy, they have no inclination. So they're piling stuff in again. And so getting people back to what are they here for, what you're trying to do, what you're trying to achieve, and making sure everything you do is alignment to that. And because that's what you've got energy for. You've got energy, whether it's a company as a vision or a mission or your own personal purpose, that's what you're going to have energy. That will drive you. But it also keeps you in a place of setting boundaries. It keeps those things where you say no to that, it doesn't align to this. I don't think we're going to do that. We have this vision to do this. So why are we doing that? And then also making sure that we balance the resource and time, and being really upfront with people and say, look, love to do it. It does align what we're trying to do. But at this moment, we just don't have the resources or the time to do it. Let's just put it on a back burner and come back to it. And it's having those sort of upfront conversations with, well, that's senior leaders in the real. It's not saying no to everything. It's just being realistic and trying to make sure we're managing our people first in how we go forward.
But, I also want to give a shout out to all those people working remotely who have children and spouses and partners and have to cook and have to walk the dog and have to, that all that, you're burnt out on multiple fronts. So for all of you, if you don't know what your purpose is, or you are so burdened by multiple tasks on multiple fronts, if you don't know what your purpose is, you probably know some of what you love. Yeah. And it is really essential, even if it's 15 minutes in the morning, to use the time you used to use for commute, take that time back for yourself if you can. Do something you love without guilt that you should be doing something you should be doing instead.
Absolutely.
Because I think that recharging. Any final comments, Julian, before we have to end?
You said recharging, find a place that a thing that you do that does recharge. And, for me, it's going running on a trail run. For others, it's watching Netflix, whatever it is, find somewhere wherever it is, you recharge. You're sometimes on your own and you just get yourself back to whatever it is. Yeah, definitely.
And if all else fails, do what I do, kiss the dog, because that always helps. And on that note, thank you all. And Julian, we'll see each other next week, same place, same time.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it already. Thank you.
Me too. Thank you.